There's an island in the Ohio River about a mile and a half downstream from Parkersburg, West Virginia, called Blennerhassett Island. On this island is a replica of a fine mansion that had been built there around the turn of the 19th century by an Irish nobleman. Who that nobleman was and how he ended up losing that house and land is the subject of our story today. Hello folks, I'm Steve Gilley, along with Rod Mullins, and this is Stories, a History of Appalachia.
You know, Steve, I've made many of a trip up to Cincinnati before, and I've looked things over up there. You know, the Ohio River is a huge river. It's not anything like what you'd see back here in the mountains and in some parts of Appalachia because of all the mountains and the twists and turns. But I tell you, once you start getting out of the area and you start looking at the Ohio River, it's about as long as it is across as it might be long going all the way down to the Mississippi River. So,
well, it's part of the Mississippi River system. So, yeah, I guess it would be big, stretching all the way from way up in Pennsylvania all the way down to, I think it's the Kentucky-Illinois border, I believe, something like that. Mm-hmm. Anyway, a big river and hopefully a big story we've got for you today.
Well, what's interesting about this is I didn't know that there were any kind of islands along the Ohio River. I just thought it was just a straight river, plain on through, no islands. But this, kind of opened my eyes up.
We're going to talk about one of those islands today. Shortly after the end of the Revolutionary War, the new states ceded their claims to lands in the west of the federal government, which in turn organized that land into territories and opened them to settlement. Soon states began to be formed and admitted into the Union, starting with Kentucky in 1792 and Tennessee in 1796. Now, the land west of the Ohio River was organized into the Northwest Territory. That land was open for settlement with some stipulations, among them that slavery was to be forbidden there. The first pioneer settlement in the area was along the Ohio River, where the Muskingum River flows into the Ohio, a place named Marietta.
Heard of Marietta before. It used to be, I think, one of the IDs for one of the towns back on one of the old television stations back in those days. They would run ads on there for businesses in Martin, Marietta, Ohio is what they would call it, Marietta. I guess it was in between somewhere. But anyway, this town was settled by settlers from New England who had invested in the Ohio Company of Associates. Now, other settlers shortly followed from other parts of the United States and Europe. Among them was an Irish nobleman and his wife who purchased an island in the Ohio that, ironically, was a part of Virginia and not the Northwest Territory. This island, a few miles from Marietta, soon became the home of probably the most lavish home in the entire frontier area. Harman Blennerhassett was born in Hampshire, England on October 8, 1765. His ancestors were members of the Conway clan and owned a 7,000-acre estate in County Curry in Ireland called Castle Conway.
Well, Harman was sent to the best schools in London, then off to Trinity College in Dublin, where he graduated with a Bachelor of Laws degree in 1790, then began to practice law. He inherited the family estate 2 years later, then got involved in Irish politics when he joined a secret society, the Society of United Irishmen, in 1793. In 1794, Rod, he married his niece, Margaret Agnew, something just as scandalous at that time as it would be today. Well, the United Irishmen soon turned radical, planning a rebellion against British rule, and Blennerhassett was concerned about being involved in that plot. So to escape being rounded up by the authorities, he and Margaret emigrated to America. And that move, by the way, also conveniently put him in a place where nobody knew he was married to his sister's daughter.
That almost rings like Jerry Lee Lewis, almost years apart from when Jerry Lee Lewis got in all that trouble. But anyhow, he bought that island in the Ohio and proceeded to build a European palace in the wilderness. Now, the mansion was the couple's dream home, surrounded by landscaped lawns and gardens. It was for a time the largest and, many said, the most beautiful private home in the West. Now, it was at this mission that Blennerhassett had held court for many important people, much as a European nobleman would do. Wealthy and connected people passing through the area on their way to Marietta and points west would stop at the estate where Harmon would put them up for a few days, and he would kind of wine them and dine them before they would hit the road again. But one of these guests, though, Steve, would prove to be Blennerhassett's undoing.
Aaron Burr had been the Vice President of the United States during Thomas Jefferson's first term from 1801 to 1805. Burr had been a senator from New York before he ran for vice president in 1800, but due to a mix-up, well, he ended up tying with Jefferson in the Electoral College. The election went to the House of Representatives, where Jefferson got the votes needed to become president and Burr the vice president. Jefferson and Burr did not get along, as you could probably guess, and Jefferson ended up picking another running mate after Burr's infamous duel with Alexander Hamilton, which ended with Hamilton's death. And that death ended Burr's political career. Now, trying to get his career back on track, Burr came up with the idea of working with the Spanish to help break off the American western lands and form a new nation, one that he would lead. And who would get involved in that? Well, in 1806, Burr came to the Blennerhassett estate for a visit. That visit must have been fruitful, for Burr returned 2 more times, resulting in Harmon Blennerhassett agreeing to finance Burr's expedition to the Southwest to meet with Spanish and British officials to take the Louisiana Territory from America.
You know, that's sort of playing with treason right there, Steve, the way that sounds, because, hey, they'd already got done. The Spanish had already been shown up by the English back in, the 1600s or before the 1600s with, the big, the Armada sinking and so forth. And here they're hobnobbing and rubbing elbows with the British, the sworn opponent of the American colonies during the Revolutionary War, and we're kind of leading up to the things that were happening that caused the War of 1812. Britain wanted to get back at the United States, or at least get the colonies back, so to speak. But Blennerhassett commissioned and paid for a fleet of boats to be built at a shipyard on the Ohio River near Marietta. Now, the 2 men had convinced around 70 men to support their efforts in the West. Rumors of this conspiracy soon reached Washington, D.C., and President Jefferson called for, you guessed it, the arrest of Aaron Burr, Blennerhassett, and the other men involved, causing Harmon to flee his island. Margaret and their children were left there and soon abandoned the island for Marietta, where Mrs. Blennerhassett attempted to get permission to leave the area in her houseboat, which had been seized by the government officials.
Well, unable to get that permission, Mrs. Blennerhassett went back to her mansion in December 1806, only to find it occupied by the Virginia militia, who had ransacked the beautiful house and trampled those manicured gardens. Well, both Burr and Blennerhassett were soon found and arrested and brought back to Richmond to stand trial for reason. The reason being that where the estate was and the plot was hatched was in what at that time was Virginia territory, so therefore they ended up back in Richmond. Anyway, both men were placed in the Virginia State Penitentiary, but, that didn't last too long. Due to Burr's standing as a former vice president, he was soon placed in a private residence under guard, and Blennerhassett was placed in an apartment on the penitentiary grounds, away from the other prisoners, and in much nicer accommodations. Burr was tried for treason in 1807 and acquitted, and with his acquittal, Blennerhassett was released. So all was good with Harmon Blennerhassett, right, Rod?
I don't know if you could say that or not, because he had to end up going away again. So Harmon Blennerhassett had his freedom, but little else. He had spent most of the family fortune on the ill-fated venture, and his fine estate in the bad need of fixing up. So Harmon and Margaret never returned to the island on the Ohio, and the mansion burned to the ground in 1811. They moved to Port Gibson in Mississippi, where Blennerhassett tried to establish a plantation, but what they lost, what little money they had, it was gone. All right, so he then moved to Montreal, Canada, to practice law, but couldn't make a go of it. Finally, he returned to England to live with a relative and eventually settled in the Channel Islands between England and France, where he died in 1831, penniless.
And that estate was rebuilt by the state of West Virginia between 1984 and 1991 and is now a West Virginia state park the Blennerhassett Island Historical State Park, which is open to the public if you've a mind to go visit. That sounds like it might be an interesting place to go. I might get up there at some point and kind of check out what fancy digs this fella had.
Hey, sounds like a road trip post-COVID. If we can get up there, that sounds like it'd be a great trip to make and to go through. Can you imagine going through that house and looking at it the way it was all set up? And, that's kind of like people that dream of going to France and seeing Versailles, where they've signed so many peace treaties over the years. And it was at one time the cesspool for the kings and queens of France. And I mean cesspool in a very nice way because, well, that's what they used it for. But anyway, that's on another story for another time. But, it would be nice to see a house like that. This would be just awesome to see and at least kind of get a grasp of what kind of wealth Harman Blennerhassett had at one time.
Well, I've got a fun fact for you.
Okay.
Marietta, Ohio was named for whom?
You got me. My brain's not working right now, but who?
Marie Antoinette.
Yeah. Yes. Let them eat cake.
Yeah, that's just a little fun fact I ran into while doing a little bit of research on this, and it kind of, I don't know, I have never figured out why they did that, but yeah, apparently Marie Antoinette was the basic source of the name Marietta, Ohio.
Wow. Well, I did not know that, and I've learned something new to throw out on my students in school when we get to studying stuff about French literature and so forth.
And folks, that's the story of Harman Blennerhassett and his ill-fated venture with Aaron Burr. Another bit of the history of this place we call home, Appalachia. Thanks for listening. Now, you can subscribe to the podcast in many ways by way of FeedBurner, on Apple Podcasts, Odyssey, Audible, Stitcher, Spotify, Good Pods, iHeartRadio, or on your favorite podcast app. Again, thanks for listening, and until next we meet, y'all take care. So long, everybody.